In general, on this channel, I don't like to deal with controversy at the moment. I like to talk about issues in a way that I'm going to find meaningful myself if I come back and watch this video in the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, etc. There, just past my shoulder, you can see a fresh durian and 2 mangoes on the edge of my table. Just pointing that out before we get wrong here. All right. We have a fashion right now within the digital vegan demimonde of vegans shutting down one another and vegans shutting down meat eaters with formal logical fallacies. And I've made videos talking about this in the past. Some of those videos ended up being deleted for reasons not worth rehearsing here. Talking about this problem, how I feel about it. This problem is almost the perfect inverse of something I dealt with about 2 years ago on this channel. I've given a lot of advice for how vegans should deal with hostile meat eaters in conversations. When meat eaters want to confront you with very barbed questions, with questions that lead you into the uncomfortable position of having to discuss the details of the rates of cancer and heart attack of a vegan diet versus a meat-eating diet, when they press you on issues in a way that's ultimately just cynical and trying to make you look like a fool and doesn't express sincere interest in learning more about veganism, how to actually respond to those questions and issues. I feel that the emphasis on formal logical fallacies instead puts vegans in this cynical position and puts the meat eaters in the awful position of trying to have a sincere conversation with a vegan who is not really being sincere and open with them, right? And that's not the position I want to be in a debate. Even when people are guilty of formal logical fallacies, I think it's really worthwhile, even if you note that, if you say, look, this is a logical fallacy, but now setting that aside, the next step for me is, I'm going to try to address your real concern, your real question, or your real objection, despite the fact that you've expressed it in a flawed way. You've made a mistake. You basically made an error stating it in a fallacious manner. And that takes just good faith and sincerity and openness to hearing what the person on the other side of the argument has to say. There's a fallacy called the tu quoque fallacy. Tu quoque is Wikipedia Latin. It's the title of the Wikipedia article. A lot of people in British politics call it the what about fallacy, or whataboutism. I've heard that used. And there are a lot of specific examples dealing with Russia versus the United States, and this use of this type of fallacious reasoning. Tu quoque fallacy really is referring to someone who cynically distracts you from the issue that you want to really debate by pointing to a spurious issue and saying, well, you also are guilty of this transgression or sin. So in a situation like Cambodia, history of Cambodia, somebody might be sincerely trying to talk about mass murder and political violence in Cambodia, and somebody else may cynically come back by saying, well, what about this other example? Well, here you are talking about Cambodia, what about Indonesia? Here you are talking about the United States and the body count they're responsible for in the Vietnam War, but you're not talking about the Soviet Union and the body count that they're responsible for in Afghanistan, right? It is a fallacy. And it can be used cynically, it can be used angrily, it can be used to just try to derail the conversation. But even so, I think the mature and correct thing to do, you can note it, you can say, well, look, this is a tu quoque fallacy. However, I understand your point, I understand your concern, I understand the question you're raising, and then just move right on to treat the substance of this conversation seriously. What good does it do to shut someone down and snub them and say this is a formal logical fallacy? Because even though it is a fallacy, they're probably expressing a real concern in a somewhat flawed form. Their real concern might be that you're employing a double standard, that you're not holding Cambodia to the same standard you would hold Indonesia to, and asking why. And that's a reasonable question, even if it's stated in an unreasonable way. And if somebody did that to me, and I've been in situations like that, I have a lot of experience talking about very tense political issues from Cambodia to Canada. I mean, whether we're talking about First Nations, forced assimilation, government policy against First Nations, very tense issue in Canada. We're talking about the history of Cambodia, the history of China, the history of Russia, or what have you. I have a lot of experience with those conversations. But it's really magnanimous and useful and moves the conversation forward to say back to someone, okay, I understand the point you're trying to make. And you can even just suggest me the next question. Say, okay, so I think what you're asking about really is this. What you're really asking is, are we holding Cambodia to an unreasonable standard compared to how we treat other countries with a similar level of political violence? is Cambodia facing a different set of consequences, a different set of criteria from Indonesia, Afghanistan? And again, if we're talking about Vietnam War or something, are we holding the United States to a different standard than we would hold the Soviet Union to, et cetera, et cetera? Those questions may be worth asking and may be worth reflecting on, even if they're introduced in the conversation in the form of a tu quoque fallacy, of a formal logical fallacy. Right? If you're in a conversation with somebody and you're not willing, in that sense, to give them the benefit of the doubt, you're not willing to say, okay, I'm willing to assume that you're trying to make a reasonable point, that you're trying to ask a meaningful question, then why are you having the conversation at all? Are these actually debates people are having? Or are they just, is this just, a new genre of YouTube entertainment of two sides trying to show who can be more cynical and mean-spirited than the other, I was talking recently to one of my fellow vegans, and the level of malice I get from other vegans, meat eaters in general, don't treat me that bad, I gotta tell you. I was talking to another vegan who was supposed to be setting up a Skype conversation with me. And, he was telling me what he found offensive on my channel. And I think he's really not capable of understanding that I was not trying to prove him wrong. I wasn't trying to say, no, objectively, this material I've got isn't offensive. I was really just interested in hearing his perspective, hearing his side, hearing why he found this material offensive, hearing him talk it through a bit. And we were doing it by email because I wanted to get it out of the way before we recorded the podcast. And he said explicitly he did not want that type of conversation to happen during the podcast. So fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about it now by email. And then during the podcast, we won't have any of this stuff on the table, and we won't have any of this stuff under the table. It'll be taken care of. I said to him, okay, look, this material you find offensive on my channel, I understand that some people would find it offensive. But what I can't understand is why you would find it offensive, given that you don't find similar material offensive, or much worse material offensive, when Durian Rider does it. You've been a fan of Durian Rider for many, many years, and much more harsh, much more castigating, much more insulting material on Durian Rider's channel you don't find offensive, but you're telling me you really do find it offensive on my channel. So why is that? Can we talk about that? And I don't really even have any agenda. I'm not really trying to prove him wrong. But to me, that is worth talking about. It is a question of why are you holding me and why are you holding Durian Rider to two very different standards. And for me, that conversation doesn't have to end with one side being right or the other side being right. For me, I'm quite happy to just communicate with this guy. Look, I'm being honest with you. I went back and watched this video of mine again that you're complaining about. I watched what I had to say about this issue again because you've complained to me about it. And I honestly do not find it offensive. I do not find my own video offensive. And while I can understand that somebody would, I can't understand why you do. So I'm just trying to find that out. I'm just trying to do something positive. He responded to this by accusing me of a tu quoque fallacy and just trying to shut me down. And then when I explained, no, I actually do not believe that is a tu quoque fallacy. I don't know if asking a question can be a tu quoque fallacy or trying to engage someone in, again, another logical concept that seems to be out of fashion within veganism right now is Socratic method. Socratic method in some ways its virtues are exaggerated, and I know its vices are also exaggerated. It's sort of strange how many perceptions and misperceptions there are of what Socratic method is and what it means. But Socratic method would be a lot better. With all its flaws, with all its shortcomings, Socratic method would be a lot better than what I see going on under the name of reason, under the name of logic. Because what I see is people who employ the concept of reason with a capital R while actually being very unreasonable. Where I see no real openness to dealing with the topic being discussed or understanding what the other person's perspective is. And in many of these conversations, if these are between vegans, if these are within veganism, there's nothing to win and there's nothing to lose. For me, the objective of the conversation is precisely just mutual understanding. It's just for me to understand what that person's perspective is, where they're coming from, why they're coming from there. And so in this conversation with this other vegan YouTuber lately, he completely missed the point when I said to him, look, I don't want you to apologize. He said to me repeatedly, he assumed that my purpose in this debate or this conversation was to try to force him to make a public apology. And I said, no, I'm not trying to do that at all. He said a couple of times, but toward the end, really explicitly, he said he assumed that he assumed that I wanted to present him with a specific list of exactly what he said in which videos and how wrong he is, why he's wrong for these things. Why should I said, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm really positively in an open-minded way, just trying to understand what your perspective is, so we can move on. And so we can do this podcast and not have this stuff, cluttering up the podcast, not have any kind of conflict on this. I'm actually interested in just hearing his perspective, although what he had to say was, from my perspective, amazingly stupid and dishonest. And his main motive of engagement with me was to accuse me again and again of dishonesty. But it's like, how can I possibly be more honest on this issue? I'm dumbing it down as much as I can for this guy. I'm being as honest and direct as I can for this guy. But the truth is, his perspective on the issues, it wasn't just stupid and it wasn't just crazy. It was also paranoid. And I have dealt with that before in talking to vegans. Paranoia means, many people think paranoia is only a kind of Hollywood movie stereotype of how actors portray paranoia. But when you're talking to someone and they feel manipulated and lied to when you're saying something so straightforward and direct, like I'm just saying to him directly, look, I went back and watched this video again because you complained about it. I don't find it offensive. I don't understand what you do. Let's talk. How can I be more honest than that? This is not being manipulative. This is not being dishonest. Just setting this out if you want to deal with it. But a paranoid frame of mind is exactly a frame of mind that responds to that with a kind of fear, which I think is basically rooted in a sense of weakness, that this person feels you're manipulating them, feels you're doing something dishonest and misleading, even when, from my perspective, I'm laying my cards flat on the table and just saying, hey, here's the situation, here's the source of tension between us, let's talk. My recent experience in talking to idiots really has soured me on reaching out to other vegans on YouTube. Being honest with you, it really has. I've said before on this channel, you got to keep an open heart and an open mind. You got to get your heart broken and then reach out to people again and again. I'm still to this day, I'm trying to invite Dom Bauer to come on this channel and do a podcast. I've been trying to arrange a podcast for a year to have Dom Bauer appear on à-bas-le-ciel. Hasn't happened yet. I guess it's been more than a year. I don't know. But as came up in my conversation with Vegan Revolution, that's not something new for this channel. I reach out to people all the time, reach out to really small channels, reach out to medium-sized and big channels, and say, look, I think there are important issues in veganism to talk about. Let's talk. But the truth is, I do have a kind of criterion that I think I have to enforce more strictly for whether or not I'm willing to talk to somebody. And that is, are they planning, are they aspiring to do something positive for the future of the vegan movement in the next 5 years? And I got to tell you, this vegan YouTuber I was just talking to now, he really doesn't. I think you can see from the conclusion of my video I did with Vegan Revolution, the guy uses the name Vegan Revolution. He's not going to do anything revolutionary. He's not going to do anything for veganism as a movement in the next 5 years. So, big or small, if someone's totally unknown or totally not on YouTube, I think that is basically now the criterion I have to use, where I'm not going to talk to people, I'm not going to reach out to people, and I'm going to reply to people if there's no possibility there of them doing something positive for veganism. They're not even planning or aspiring or hoping to. Because a lot of us are in circumstances, as I am right now, where you can't do anything right now. Or you're looking around and planning and doing the research and looking at the options. You may not have good options right now. But if that aspiration to do something positive isn't there, I just don't see why I should tolerate, what I've been getting back from these people. And look, obviously this is also built on negative experiences with people like Vegan Cheetah and Durian Rider himself. I've been through so much of this. And it's a very simple question, but it deserves to be asked of Vegan Cheetah, of Durian Rider, of many of these other channels. What are you planning to do in the next 5 years? And almost any positive answer is worth listening to, is worth responding to, is worth debating, and it may influence others, right? I had some contact lately with just some Facebook messages back and forth with Joey Carbstrong, and he said the simplest thing, but it's such a positive attitude to have. Joey Carbstrong, his channel is very different from mine, his approach is very different from mine, and in the past he was a Durian Rider supporter, now he's not. Joey Carbstrong, wrote to me, or replied to me, and he just said, look, your channel is so different from mine, but I think that's great because we need different kinds of channels for different types of people. We need veganism. We need vegan activism being presented to the public with myriad different strategies, different tactics, different packages, even, different philosophies. Because veganism is a message that needs to reach all kinds of different people. And for anyone who's engaged in any kind of activism, I mean, look, up to a point, I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in lying to the public. There are all kinds of things that for me are hard limits where I don't accept the movement as legitimate if it crosses those hard limits. But sure, I mean, that's fundamentally a very positive attitude to take, which is, look, I may not understand you. I may not understand where you're coming from. I may not appreciate your content. I may not be a fan of your channel. I may not enjoy your content, etc. But I can recognize we need a diversity of voices because we're reaching the world's most diverse audience. We're not just reaching vegans, who are an incredibly diverse group of people. We're also reaching all the pre-vegans, the people who are meat eaters today, but who might contribute positively to this movement in the future. And shutting someone down in mid-sentence and saying that's a logical fallacy, snubbing someone with that, I just don't see how that can ever really be a positive tool in our toolbox in these kinds of difficult conversations and negotiations.